I want to talk about law. This is a video that I've been putting off for some time, and not because it's not something that I don't want to do, but because law as a whole is such an incredibly broad and heavy subject that, I'll be honest, I don't even feel qualified to talk about it. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a law scholar. In fact, I don't even recall ever taking civics in high school. I'm not even sure if civics was even offered as a class when I was in high school, and I don't think anyone's teaching it now. I think the closest I ever came to that would have been social studies when I was in elementary school. And then after that, I took some history classes and geography, and that was about it. Civics is just not something that we really discuss anymore. We don't teach it anymore, and I think it's fallen by and large out of our daily lives. And that is something that is increasingly becoming a problem. With everything that's been going on in the last year or so, the last 4 years, well, the last decade to be honest, I have kept up with the news. I've tried to keep my thumb on what's going on. And one of the things that I keep seeing over and over and over again is every time a story comes out, every time something controversial comes out, there is always somebody who will come out and say, they can't do that, this is illegal. And it's not one side or the other. Take the past 4 years when the United States had Trump in office, and this is a really good example because for some reason Trump was the world's president. People in the US complained about Trump. People in Britain complained about Trump. People in Germany complained about Trump. People in Japan complained about Trump. It was common for everyone in the world to hate Trump. And every single one of his decisions that came up, every single order he gave, came up saying, he can't do that, that's illegal. Of course, on the other side, you had the people that were on his side saying, they can't fight this, what they're doing is illegal. And then we've had the months and months of violence that has swept across the entire world in the wake of police killings and riots and all kinds of stuff that I'm not going to get into because that is not the purview of what this video is about. Not implicitly anyway. Tangentially, yes, it is absolutely what this video is about. But I want to talk about law. Now, I'm going to start with the basics. Like, if you were going into Civics 101 and cracking open a civics textbook, this is probably one of the things that is going to be in Chapter 1. The Oxford definition of law. I'm going to read it verbatim. The system of rules which a particular country or community recognizes as regulating the actions of its members and which it may enforce by the imposition of penalties. That's a pretty good definition. In fact, when I was thinking about this video and trying to outline how I was going to cover such a broad subject, I thought it was the best place to do is to think about what are laws inherently. Not what do we think they are, and I will get to that in just a moment, but what are they? And at their core, what is law? Law is the common consensus of the community. And that's it. We have laws everywhere. You have laws in your community, you have laws in your state, you have laws in your own household. Think about this. If you have, say, a nice living room, okay, and you've got some new carpet in there, and you declare that there will be absolutely no food and drink in the living room, okay? You have made a declaration. Now, is this declaration law? Well, kinda. You've made a declaration, but until you actually start enforcing it, it's not really law. Now, if somebody comes over and they decide that they're going to bring in their McDonald's bag and they're going to sit down on your brand new sofa and eat their greasy burger right over your brand new carpet, you might say, hey, no food or drink in the living room. All right. And now it's on to them. And so they say, yeah, screw you. I don't care. And then you say, I said no food or drink in my living room, or you're going to have to leave. And then they say, I don't care. And so, either physically removing them yourself or calling the police on them if you have to and just say, look, I no longer want this person in my house, I need them removed. You have laid down a law inside your own house. You have decided that these are the rules, and they will be imposed upon people by force. You have made a law. Now, this is a very small law. Obviously, it only applies to your house. However, we have laws everywhere. We have laws in our own communities. If you and everybody on your street gets together and says, I don't know, give me a good example. No one is going to paint their house yellow because yellow houses are awful. And if you are a person who has painted your house yellow, yes, I'm talking directly to you. No one should ever paint their house yellow. But we all decided that we are not going to allow this. And then somebody decides that they're going to paint their house yellow. Well, we all have an agreement, and so we're going to enforce this agreement somehow. Now, you can't exactly go and burn down their house. That would be arson, and arson is illegal by that of a higher stature, which is something I'm going to get to in a minute. However, you can decide that, well, we can't force them to change it, but we can apply other pressures. We will no longer include them in any of the community activities. We will actively disinvite them from any of those things. The summer block party, yeah, they're not coming. Sunday brunch for the church, yeah, not invited. We are going to impose penalties on this person because they painted their house yellow. And honestly, they painted their house yellow. They deserve it. So, we have laws. And laws do not necessarily have to be handed down by somebody in government. They can be handed out by the community because the community is what's important here. Law is community. It is community enforcement. It is the community coming together and saying that we are going to live a particular way. And we're not going to tolerate any other way of living. This can be good and bad. Obviously, we have many examples throughout history of laws that have been bad. We have many laws that are also good, but we've had a lot of laws that have been bad. And I will talk about those later as well. But I wanted to start this off by simply laying out the foundation of what are laws and give a few examples so that people know exactly what we're talking about so we are all on the same page. It's important. If we're not together, we can't progress forward together. So now that we're there, I want to talk about the hierarchy of laws. Because I gave you an example of a law inside your own house. I gave you an example of a law inside your own community. And I said you can't go ahead and burn down, that person's house because there are laws above yours. And so I want to talk about how in modern society we have a hierarchy of laws. Now, most people don't think about things like your house, any laws inside your house or laws inside your community, because by and large, you can kind of ignore those and what's really going to happen to you. But on the larger scale, when we're talking about nations and states, I can't speak for every country in the world. I have to use the United States as the example because it's where I live and it's the one that I know best. Here in the United States, we have various tiers. Now, the highest tier, of course, is the federal law. That is the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and any other laws that they have passed in the meantime beyond there. And this is very important because when you look at the United States Bill of Rights, it is 10 rights right there. Now, some of them are a little bit nested. For example, the first right, which is basically just freedom, is 5 nested rights. It's speech, religion, press, petition, and assembly. However, they're all kind of combined right there in the First Amendment that basically is you are free. Period. You're free to talk, you're free to worship, you're free to assemble, all of it. And then we have the other amendments that go all the way down to one very special one, and that is Amendment number 10. Now, Amendment number 10 is something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough, and that is the States' Rights Amendment. And basically what that says is anything not outlined in federal law is a state law. These 9 laws right here trump everything. And you cannot just go over them. Obviously, this has not happened. I will get to that in a minute. And I already know, I can already hear it from here. There are people saying, well, that gets, ignored every single day of the week. I know. I'll get to it in just a minute. This is the idea, the concept that was put in place at the time. So you have the federal laws. 10th Amendment says that anything not covered here is a state law. And that meant that the states could basically do whatever they want so long as they did not go up against those other 9. This is kind of like the 3 laws of robotics. You have law number 1, and then you have law number 2 that says you can't do this unless it would, or you can do this unless it would conflict with number 1, and number 3 says you can do this unless it would conflict with numbers 1 and 2. Same concept. So even if you haven't heard of this before, you've heard of this before. So then we have the state laws. Now, state laws, as I just said, you can do anything you want so long as it doesn't go up against those 9 amendments in the Bill of Rights. Great. That sounds great for you. So you can basically do whatever you want. You want to outlaw the color purple? Go for it. Why do I have a hard-on for purple and yellow right now? I don't know. But it's a good example. So, states can do whatever they want. And they're going to operate the same way as the federal government will. They'll have their own laws that they'll put in place and say, we're all going to act this way, we're all going to follow these rules. Fantastic. Then you get down to the city level. Now, every city can have its own laws as well. Its own laws, its own ordinance, its own prescriptions, whatever. And they can do whatever they want, so long as they do not countermand any of the state's laws, and by extension, so long as they do not countermand any of the federal laws. Because we as a city have all agreed that we are going to abide by these laws, all of these cities have to abide by the state's laws, and then all of the states have to abide by the federal laws. This is the hierarchy of things. Of course, we do have methods in place where we can change these things. We have the legal processes to go through, review, amend, all these things. It's good. It's a really good system. Is it a perfect system? Not usually. But it's pretty good. Nothing's perfect. But I think it's important to keep this in mind because one of the things that we keep coming back to is when we say they can't do that. Well, sometimes they're right about that, sometimes they're wrong about that. And I want to take guns as the ever-popular controversial example of this. This is a great example of how this is supposed to work and how it is not working. So, in the United States, Second Amendment, the entire world is familiar with the Second Amendment because it is the gun amendment. And guns are big and scary and nobody likes them except for the people that like them. Second Amendment says that, in short, in order to keep a well-regulated militia, everyone has the right to keep and bear arms. Period. It's right there, Second Amendment. In ink and parchment. You cannot argue the wording on it, even though people have tried. Now, remember what I said about the whole hierarchy of things. The way this is supposed to work is that no state is supposed to be able to disarm their people, because if a state could disarm their population, what would be the point of having that law? What would be the point of having the Second Amendment if you could collectively just get several states together and say, we're not doing that anymore? The important reason that we have to consider this is because if you can do it with one law, you can do it with any law. So you have the Second Amendment, and then you have a state that says, well, we're going to ignore that one because we don't like guns, and therefore we're going to ban guns. Okay. What about the Fourth Amendment? You're going to simply remove people's free or protections from search and seizure? Many of them actually have. How about the fifth one? You're going to remove people's rights to due process? Several of them have. If you can't, or if you're not going to respect one of them, it's no stretch to assume that you're not going to respect any of them. And thus, we have a failing in the law, because this is supposed to be an umbrella law to cover everyone that we've all agreed to operate under. But if we don't agree to operate under it, exactly what is the law? Remember our definition that we started off with. It is a system of rules which a particular country or community recognizes. And thus we have members of that community who no longer recognize it. Now, we've always had people who don't recognize laws. We call those people criminals. Criminals do not recognize laws. Or they do, and they simply recognize that they're not going to follow those laws. Thus, they're criminals. But by and large, the population is going to say these are the rules that we're abiding by until they don't. And this is where I want to get into what I'm calling legal writing the paper tiger. Now, if you're not familiar with the concept of a paper tiger, it's this. It's just that, a paper tiger. It's a big, scary tiger, either on paper or made of paper. It's big, it's imposing, it's frightening until you realize that you can literally poke your finger through it and destroy it. It literally has no power over you outside of the power you allow it to have over you. And one of the things that I believe people neglect to realize is that all laws are paper tigers. All of them. Every single one. We have so many laws on the books right now. I believe the popular saying is that every person commits like 3 felonies in the United States a day without even realizing it. And I would believe that. I don't know every law. I don't think it's possible to know every law. Even legal scholars and lawyers do not know every law. That is why every lawyer has a bookshelf of law books that they can reference at an instant, and an entire library behind them somewhere, whether it's at a law firm or an actual legal library that they can reference for all the things that they cannot stuff into their brains. And mind you, lawyers go to school for like, 8, 12 years just stuffing law into their brains. So it is no surprise that people break laws all the time, not even knowing that they're laws. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? If you can break a law and there's no consequences, then it's not a law. We have to remember the second part of that definition, okay? The actions of its members and which it may enforce by the imposition of penalties. That is what makes a law a law. A law, at its most basic, is the justification for the use of force. We can say that as a community we have come together and said that we don't want yellow houses in our community, and we are going to force people to not have yellow houses in our community. And we're going to force them to not have yellow houses because that's what we agree on, and none of us are going to stop each other if someone goes ahead and does it. That could technically even extend to burning down the yellow house, which may be illegal under state laws, but if no one's going to turn it in, and no one's going to say who did it, then what are you going to do? Arson may be illegal, but if you can't punish the arson, if you cannot impose penalties on an arsonist, then the arson is suddenly legalized. unless you're going to go through and punish the entire community. Legal and illegal are actually incredibly subjective when you think about them. On paper, yes, it's a very, very well-defined line. You either did something illegal or you didn't. But once you get off the paper, once you see the paper tiger for what it really is, it's incredibly subjective and very murky. And that's what we're facing right now. When we're looking at things like police killings, when we're looking at the riots that followed them, when we're looking at politicians who don't even follow their own rules, when we're looking at laws that violate other laws, a city law that violates a state law that violates a federal law, you see these laws for the paper tigers that they are. There's literally nothing to stop them, and if there's no enforcement of the laws, then the law may as well not exist. I want to go back to my example for the Second Amendment, because it is the ever-popular punching bag. The federal law says that the ability to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Well, many states have done that already. In fact, I would dare say every single state has infringed upon this right. Every single state, all 50 of them, and probably most of the territories as well, has broken federal law. All of them. If you have a single law on the books that says you cannot have a certain firearm, or rather any arms, because all arms. So any law that says you can't have a firearm, any law that says you cannot have a sword, any law that says you cannot have a knife, any law that says you cannot have a cannon, a tank, a battleship, a B-52 Stratofortress bomber. I don't know where you're going to park it, but if there's a law that says you can't have it, it's an infringement on the Second Amendment. And there's many people out there who will disagree with that. There's many people out there who will agree with that. But the point here is, whether you agree or whether you disagree, if the law has been broken and nothing is done to punish that and reverse it, is it really a law? From a legal standpoint, from an enforcement standpoint, it should come down to this. If a person wants to have arms, okay? Whether that is a flintlock musket or a Russian-built minigun that fires 7,000 rounds per minute. I don't know. I don't know my guns that well. If the state were to come in and say, you're not allowed to have that, it should come down to the federal government to say, I'm sorry, there's a law on the books that says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It doesn't specify certain law or certain arms. It just says the right to keep and bear arms. And thus, the state should be slapped down and or punished. Don't know how you punish a state, but that's how you do. The state should be punished for what they've done. After all, part of the law is the enforcement by the imposition of penalties. But they haven't. And so it begs the question of whether or not the Second Amendment is even law. Sure, it's on paper, but what good does the paper do? For a more practical example, I've used this one many times when talking to people. Murder. Murder is illegal. And I think that we all agree that murder is bad. And very often, because, I keep up with the news, I see cases of people who get murdered. And one of the things that always comes up, inevitably, in every comment section that I have read, is this idea that, well, it's a question, really, of how could this have happened? How? How does this happen in our law-abiding society? To which I have to ask those people, what in the law thinks that you're safe for murder? See, the thing about law is that law is a band-aid. It's only meant to either prevent you from doing it in the first place out of fear that, something might happen to you, or to address the actions after the fact. There is no law that actually protects you. As I said before, criminals exist. Criminals don't care about laws. Somebody could come into your house today. Somebody could come into your house while you're listening to this, and they could murder you. It's a fact of life. Is it very likely to happen? I certainly hope not. I mean, there's parts of the world where I'm sure that actually could happen. But is it likely? In general, no. But at the same time, if somebody wanted to, what's stopping them? Is your door locked? Are your windows locked? How far away are the police? Can you defend yourself? Are you even allowed to defend yourself? The fact that murder on the books is illegal is not going to stop a murder. It's the same argument that people use against gun control. Making guns illegal is not going to stop criminals from getting guns. It's not wrong. And we have plenty of evidence to show that. Plenty of evidence. There is no law that can stop you from doing something. Driving down the road, you see speed limit signs that says you may go no faster than this. That sign doesn't actually stop you. There is nothing except you stopping you from pushing the gas down and going as fast as you want down that road, except for the fact that you're breaking the law, and if you get caught, that's a big if, you may find yourself in trouble. The community may enforce that law with the imposition of penalties. But there's nothing actually stopping you from doing it. The same thing goes with what we've seen over the last year and the last 4 years of violence across the United States and across other parts of the world. Police. We have charged police with the enforcement of law, and we have given them great latitudes to do it in. And yet, whenever they exercise those latitudes, there's always somebody who will come out and say, they can't do that. That's illegal. Okay? But it didn't stop them, did it? Whether you agree with what they did or not, whether it's actually illegal or not, it didn't stop them. The same thing is true about the response to them. A police officer kills somebody. Almost said policeman, but we have women police officers too, so must be equal. A police officer kills somebody. And what's the response? Well, in all too many circumstances, we have seen rioting, looting, arson, and murder. Pretty sure all of those are illegal too. Pretty sure that almost every single state, if not every state, has a law in the book that says rioting is illegal. Looting, which is theft on a wide scale, theft is illegal, therefore looting is illegal. Arson, as I pointed out before, it's illegal to burn people's stuff down. And murder, as I also mentioned, is also illegal. That's 4 things right there that are legal. And 4 things that have happened over and over and over again. Why didn't the law stop them? Because the law actually has no power outside of what we give it. If we all believe that murder is bad, and we will go to no ends, no lengths? I lost my metaphor here. But if we will stop at nothing to make sure that every single murderer is strung up by their toes and has their mouth filled with cotton. Man, my imagination is getting weird today. Anyway, if we string them up and stuff their mouth full of cotton, then we are enforcing the law. Kind of a silly way to enforce the law, but we are enforcing the law. And we are making sure, we are showing, through enforcing the imposition of penalties, that murder is illegal. But if murder happens and no one does anything about it, it begs the question of, is it actually illegal, or is this just writing on paper? The same thing goes for any crime that's out there, and we have seen a lot of crime in the last year. And a lot of this comes down to kind of two things. We have laws for a reason. And I want to get into what I'm calling the legal good versus the moral good. As I said before at the beginning of this, we have had bad laws in our history. Every country has had bad laws. Some countries are built on bad laws. Not judging, but you know who you are, and you know what you've done, and you should go sit in the corner. Anyway, though, sometimes we have bad laws, and it is actually morally good to disregard those. I would like to go back to the civil rights era in the United States. During that time, during the time of Jim Crow, during the time of protest and all that stuff, we had laws on the books that said that if you weren't white, you weren't allowed to do certain things. Now, I think it was largely just if you were black, you weren't allowed to do things. I don't know what the status of other minorities was back then because, well, by and large, everything there was focused on blacks, but I'm pretty sure that everyone who wasn't white got the short end of the stick. And so there were laws on the books almost everywhere that said you are not allowed. And what did they do? They went ahead and did it anyway, because they said, look, your laws are bad, and we are morally justified in doing this. Were they? Weren't they? I would say that they were. I mean, we should all be equal. However, what you declare to be moral has been the justification for doing a lot of bad things in history, so you got to be a little bit careful about that one. In this case, though, it was absolutely a good thing. And people stood for their principles, they stood for their freedom, they said, we are no longer going to observe these laws. They didn't observe those laws, and so we ended up with the Civil Rights Movement, we ended up with the Civil Rights Act, and we got equal rights for every person, no matter what color their skin was, what their nationality was. It's the Civil Rights Act, you can look it up. On the other hand, you can also look at that same situation from the other side. Now, whether you agree with this or not, I'm not making judgments, and I am not going to say that this is my opinion at all. However, if you want to understand the entire circle of this, you have to use a little bit of empathy and you have to see things from the other side. Well, we can look back on this now and say that those laws were bad. From the perspective of the people enforcing the laws, they believed that they were doing so for the moral good. Perhaps they realized that the laws that they were making were discriminatory. Many of those people that I think were making those laws believed that the discrimination was good for moral reasons. Now, what those moral reasons are, I honestly cannot fathom. I wasn't there, I didn't live during that time. I was born like 20 years after the entire civil rights movement. So I can't even imagine what the moral justification would have been. But presumably, they had one. I cannot imagine that they would have just gone around making laws willy-nilly for no reason. They had some kind of justification, so they had a moral good, even if it wasn't a legal good. And for all I know, maybe it was a legal good back then. Again, I wasn't there. At the same time, we look now at all the rioting. Okay, as I pointed out just a few minutes ago. Rioting, looting, arson, murder. Okay, all those are legal. And if you were to ask many of the people that were out there in the middle of it, and you can look up on YouTube, on any other video platform out there, just look for interviews, look for news commentary, look for news reporting, talking to the people that were in these things. They feel morally justified in doing it. They know that they are breaking the laws. They either believe that the laws are bad, as it is, or they believe that they are morally justified in breaking them. I've heard pretty much every excuse there is, saying that they are burning stuff down because they are burning down symbols, or they are looting to give back to their community. whatever the excuses are, they have a justification to say, your laws are bad, we're good. This is, how do I want to phrase this? I want to say it's a problem, but it's not a problem. I mean, it is kind of a problem in that the stuff is going on, but we have to remember one thing. Law is the system of rules which a particular country or community recognizes as regulating the actions of its members. Going right back to the definition of it. And as I said before, my own definition of it is the law is whatever the community agrees to and whatever the community will enforce. On a certain level, you have to say that if this is what their community is coming out and doing, and if the community is not stopping it, then that is what the law is. I mean, laws don't necessarily need to go through a whole process of change. You don't have to have committees and everything. If the community itself will just simply say, we are either adopting a law or we are ignoring a law. And that's something that we have seen over the last 4 years, and we continue to see today, in the United States today. After this latest election, you have seen many states who have come forward and said, we do not recognize this new administration, and we are not going to follow any of its laws. Okay. Well, then you have one of two things that's going to happen. Either the federal government is going to have to enforce those laws with the imposition of penalties, or we have to acknowledge that they don't simply exist as laws and they're mere suggestions. No enforcement of penalties, no imposition of penalties, no law. It's the same as having your house, having your new furniture, your new carpet and living room, and saying, yeah, I have a rule that we have no food and drink in the living room, but I'm not going to do anything about it. Then is it a law? Is it a rule? It's a suggestion. It's a please don't. I'm not going to do anything, but I'm asking. And that's kind of where we are on that one. And that really sums up law in general. This has gotten rather long, and I'm coming to the end. So I want to try and sum this up as best I can, just so that there's a tight little nutshell to go home with. Remember that law is a matter of community consensus. It's what we will tolerate, what we won't tolerate, what we will enforce, and what we won't enforce. What we have on paper is just that. It's paper. We can put our laws on paper so that we can show them to other people and say, we as a community have all agreed to abide by this. But the minute the community changes its mind on anything, whether or not it's on paper or not, doesn't matter. The fact is that the community can decide when and wherever it wants what the laws are, what the laws are not. And a good community will be consistent on that. A bad community will not be. But that fact still remains that we can decide whenever we want what our laws will be and what our laws will not be, as long as there's the majority of the community who is willing to go along with it. Because whatever's on paper has all the power that a piece of paper has. And sometimes what's written on that paper is morally good. Sometimes what's written on that paper is not. And if the community decides that what is on that paper is not morally good, then they may decide that it's not going to be legally good either. And they may decide that their illegal actions will now be legal, and the legal actions taken to enforce that with the imposition of penalties will be bad. Meaning that laws are much more subjective than most people think they are. There is no absolute law. And whenever you see something happen, if you're thinking to yourself, if you're commenting, if you're talking with your coworkers, if you find yourself saying, they can't do that, that's illegal, I would hope that you would then stop and ask yourself, if it's illegal, then why are they being allowed to do it? And if they are being allowed to do it, is it really legal, Or am I no longer a part of that community? Because many people, I think, are finding themselves in that position where they're saying, I thought this was illegal. As it turns out, it's not. And if the majority of the people in the community think that it's not, perhaps I'm not as big a part of that community as I thought I was. And maybe I should be a bigger part of that community. I don't know. That's an entirely separate topic for another video. This has already gone on for 40 minutes, and I'm going to wrap it up here. So I hope that this has given you something to think about, something to reflect on, something that you can use a more critical eye with now as you read the news, as you see the events going on around you. And I hope that I've managed to do so in at least a reasonably coherent fashion. Like I said, this was a very big topic, and I have put it off because I don't really feel qualified to talk about it, but we never do. And that's why sometimes it's best to just jump in. So, I hope you've had, well, maybe not fun, but I hope you've enjoyed splashing around in this deep subject with me. If you like what I'm doing, please leave a like and a comment in the comment section. I will be reading comments. If there are suggestions for other videos or questions about this video in particular, I will be looking for them. And I think that's about it. So, thank you for listening to me. It's been good talking to you. Been kind of a harrowing experience for me, but I'm glad we did it. So until next time, when I come back with another one of these subjects, something that I feel needs to be talked about, yeah, have a good day. Take care.